Hey, true crime fanatics, this is Claire.
And I'm Andy.
You're tuned in to the Homicide Hobbies podcast, which is a podcast for people who love to hear about the horrendous crimes that people commit. Enjoy. Who are we talking about today?
So today, we are going to talk about Elizabeth Ann Duncan.
Where and when?
She was born originally Hazel Lucille Sinclair Nye in 1904. She grew up in Kansas, Missouri. So Elizabeth, she was convicted of hiring someone to murder her pregnant daughter-in-law. Yep. Some of the trigger warnings, I feel like I just kind of told you, which is the murder of a pregnant woman. Some incest.
She succeeds?
She does. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about her.
That's not true. That feller's penis falls off when we talked about him.
Yeah, but nobody liked that episode, so they liked the murder. Well, they like to hear about it at least. But, so our trigger warnings, incest. There's no bestiality that I'm aware of, so I'm sorry for that for you, Claire. This woman is brutally beaten, so I do feel bad about that.
By her mother-in-law?
I said she was convicted of hiring someone to commit murder.
Oh.
Which, by the way, was not in the 70s. It was in 1958. Elizabeth had been married a total of 10 or 11 times while she was on trial. She testified.
There might have been 11th. I'm afraid to count the others. They didn't mean that much to me. I haven't figured out a voice for her. Her glasses make me think she talks nasally. I don't know what that has to do with her glasses.
Apparently you think that they're pussy.
Well, they do look like cat frames.
So it's unclear exactly how many husbands she had, just that there were a lot of them. Most of Elizabeth's marriages were shams or at least bigamous. She used them as simple arrangements to steal money from the men and outright just steal from them. And then she would also eventually file for divorce from some of them and be granted alimony.
What?
Mm-hmm. So she would marry young men by telling them in order to inherit a small fortune, she needed to be married. So they would volunteer because she would promise them a cut of this small fortune. So I don't really feel bad for these men.
How did she get alimony, though?
So the way I read it, she would make it like she was okay. Okay, so she would manipulate them into marrying her so that they would get a cut of money, right? Mm-hmm. And she would be like, look, you don't even have to have sex with me. We can see with other people. And then when they would be sleeping with other women, catch proof of them cheating and then file for divorce because they were cheating. And then
she had proof.
Yeah. In some cases, she would not divorce one husband before she would marry another man.
A two-timing hussy.
One of the men she married was one of her son's law schoolmate.
What was the age gap?
She lied about her age and promised him a baby.
Ew.
Mm-hmm. Along with all these marriages that she's had, Elizabeth ends up giving birth to a total of 6 children. However, when she's asked how many kids she has, she only admits to having 2 kids. Her son, Frank, who is the light of her life and her one true love. And when I say that Frank was the light of her life, I mean when she eventually goes on trial for murder, she testifies under oath that she loved Frank the most.
What, her child?
Yeah.
Well, I guess he was a favorite.
Yes, and she testified under oath that he was her favorite.
She was under oath. She had to tell the truth, the whole truth.
The other child that she also claimed was a daughter named Patricia, who died at age 15. She suffered a spontaneous cerebral hemorrhage, which, if you don't know what that is, it's a blood clot in absence of trauma or surgery. So basically a type of stroke. Basically
Yeah, some sort of a brain bleed. I wonder if it was like an original shaken baby.
I don't know. But she was 15, so I don't know if that caused some
damage. Well, fuck, Andrea.
I can't help it if you done ain't listening. So Basically, an artery blew in her brain. The blood pools around the tissue, killing brain cells.
So if I just said maybe it was shaken baby and you said maybe and then said she's 15, jackass.
I said
Why did you agree with me? Maybe. No, she's not a baby for one. Go on.
so. What I mean is maybe she suffered from shaken baby and had some sort of trauma that later,
There's no
like,
backpedaling.
well, that's why I said maybe.
You
Like,
told me wrong.
I did not. You can go back and listen to this. I said she also had a daughter named Patricia who died at age 15. She suffered a
Mm.
spontaneous cerebral hemorrhage. And then I explained what that meant. And I can't help it if you done didn't listen to that part. But it is possible that she had an injury sustained while a baby because typically isn't it elderly people that suffer strokes? I realize that anybody can have an
Mm.
artery blow, but
No, not just the elderly. But
well,
15 does seem rather young. But you know what? Back in the day and all that, when you could drink and smoke and do all sorts of things while pregnant, who knows what she had?
yeah, nonetheless, those are the 2 kids she claimed, her son Frank and her daughter who passed away.
Now these bad seeds that she doesn't claim the rest of the family.
She
Do
does not. She has 3 daughters and 1 son. I have no clue if they're alive, if they live with one of her many, many exes. I have absolutely no clue.
maybe she doesn't either.
She probably doesn't because she's too busy obsessing over her son, the one she likes. One time, not at band camp, a friend was staying at a hotel suite with Elizabeth and her son. I don't know the age of her son at the time, but when the friend got woken up in the middle of the night, she heard a ruckus coming from the second bedroom. She was shocked when she realized she was listening to the loud lovemaking sounds between Elizabeth and her son.
Oh,
Mhm.
where were your triggers on this? Because I feel like I was blindsided with that
I
mom and
said
son
incest.
diddling.
I said incest 2 times.
You must have blocked it out.
And then I said, there ain't no bestiality in this. I know how you done love that. I think Claire needs to go latte or something, or de-latte.
Or Q-tip.
Perhaps do that. Elizabeth had also been arrested for operating a brothel out of San Francisco. So there's your red light district contributor, Claire.
Mm.
She was also arrested at one point for writing bad checks.
She wasn't making too good of money then.
Frank, her son, was an attorney and he lived with his mommy.
The one he's
Elizabeth.
diddling?
Mhm. Elizabeth and Frank had an incredibly unhealthy relationship if you haven't figured that one out. And when
I
I
would
say
say, yeah, I would say it's unhealthy. It's
and
unhealthy
what
to fuck your mother. Anyone out there who's confused, it's a no-no.
I feel like you're in Alabama, so you might want to give them a shout out.
They don't have internets to give them a shout out.
Well, when I say that these 2 had an unhealthy relationship, I mean it was super unhealthy. Aside from their incestuous relationship, they were frequently referred to as having a husband-wife bond instead of a mother-son.
Ew.
It's said that Elizabeth doted upon Frank in a suffocating kind of motherly love, obsessed with the stress that he would one day leave her.
Ew.
It gets better.
What? Like, I don't know if you'll know any of this since you don't know a lot about the other children. But were there not any other boys? Did she just like get rid of all of her female?
I told you she had 3 other daughters and 1 other son.
Why do I not remember this?
You know what? I have no idea.
Like, I feel like this is not information you said before.
I feel like when this case takes an hour, it's gonna be your fault. Are you good? Do you got any
I
more
don't
questions?
know. I feel like I've got a lot.
I'm just gonna keep going. You just sit there and just try to stay focused. Okay? Elizabeth
Mhm.
was so obsessed with Frank, she would follow him to work at the courthouse holding his hand, and then she would go from
To
courtroom to
his
court.
work?
Uh-huh. She would go from courtroom to courtroom, and if he won a case, she would stand and applaud.
He didn't have friends, huh?
So he did, and his Remember, she done tried to marry the one and promised his
Oh.
friend a baby. So
What
Frank's friends
the
thought
where is this? Indiana?
it's in California.
Oh.
So Frank's friends thought that Frank needed to cut that umbilical cord and suggested finding a woman and getting married because that would be the antidote to cut those ties.
Oh, oh no. This
Right
poor
along.
incoming lady.
Yes. I feel like that advice is the same idea as these women that get pregnant to try to save a failing relationship. You don't go find a new one to save a failing, messy one. You can't ghost your mommy that you're
How
currently
about deal
screwy.
with your mama drama before
How
adding
about
a baby mama drama?
how about stop diddling your mother?
Yeah, I don't know why that wasn't a suggestion, number one. That I think you and your mother are too close. That if you're using her vagina as a pillow, that's when you know this is a no-no. I mean, I feel like way before then too, but
It's a wonder he grew up to be semi like not crazy. Like,
I think he is. He
well,
held. How
like
old
with
was he when he was walking into court holding his mom's hand? What was
30.
the age range on them?
Damn
He's
it,
the
Claire.
youngest, oldest.
I don't know where he falls because the other kids are a moot point.
You weren't
57.
paying attention to any of them because she wasn't diddling them. Now they're
Nope.
not important. What?
Okay, so in 1957, when he was 30, she was 53. So there's your age difference.
It's not that bad.
It is not.
Yep, it's more the bad of it's still his mom.
Sure is. I figure maybe, I don't know. I'm not even going to try to make sense of why she's diddling
Yeah, I was
her.
gonna say, please do not try to reason bestiality. Please, well, don't try to reason that either. But don't try to reason incest as
I
a
wasn't going to.
workaround.
I was going to try, and then it's just too ooey.
No, that's
But
not a
anyway,
mindset. I think there's something wrong with them.
for sure. So in 1957, they get into a huge fight because Frank
Wouldn't
was
hold her
trying to
hand.
no, Frank was trying to untangle this mess of marriages. So when she wasn't married and living with whatever significant other at the time, she was living with her son.
Imagine that. The husband that she marries doesn't want to share her with her son.
And then she because she was trying to untangle the mess of marriages, or she was refusing to cooperate, and he was just finally sick and tired of the drama. And this fight resulted in Frank saying that he wanted Elizabeth, his mommy, to move out of their apartment.
What?
Mm-hmm.
Their apartment.
So it was his apartment, but she moved into it and was living with him for a few years. So
This is
yes,
so disgusting, Andrea.
not out of sadness, but out of revenge, Elizabeth tried to commit suicide by overdosing with sleeping pills.
That'll bring him back.
She was rushed to the hospital and had her stomach pumped of the overdose of sleeping pills. She was briefly in a coma, but she would eventually recover. While she was in the hospital, Elizabeth was being taken care of by a 29-year-old nurse named Olga Kupchik. Olga was born in Canada, and it said that she was a beautiful woman. So when Frank comes to visit his mommy once she woke up from her coma, Frank and Olga had an immediate attraction. He began to spend as much time as possible around Olga, much like he used to do with his mother. Now, Claire, I'm not a doctor, but I'm going to say that Frank is a stage 5 clinger because how he can go from being clingy with his mommy to now he's found a replacement.
Well, she in her
so
50s
quickly.
because I feel like he's likes the older ladies.
I just told you he's 30, she's 29.
I'm having a comprehension issue today.
Yeah, I've noticed. So Elizabeth saw the wanting stares between Frank and Olga and realized that this could be the other woman who was going to steal her son away from her vagina. And she objected to her adults.
Ew. What is wrong with you?
I was just checking to see if you're actually listening still.
I have my hearing. It's my comprehensions.
They seem to go hand in hand today. But anyway, so she objected to her adult son dating an adult woman.
Adult woman, Andrea?
Well, At least she's not a child, okay?
She wouldn't
She's
have objected to that?
an adult in there just in case you're like, oh, so she wouldn't have objected if she was a child. So I threw it in there thinking you wouldn't point it out. But no matter what, it was a
weird.
lose-lose.
It was a weird detail.
Hey, anywho, I was simply pointing out they're both adults. She needs to back the heck off. But nonetheless, Frank and Olga began to date. Elizabeth would call Olga several times a day, demanding that Olga leave her son alone and even threatened to kill her if she didn't stop dating him.
Olga threatened this?
No, I read so. Mommy is threatening the girlfriend.
Because she wants her some sausage.
During one of these phone calls, Olga told Elizabeth that she and Frank were going to be married, and Elizabeth said,
"You'll never marry my son. I'll kill you first."
That's not funny, but I like the way you read that. Olga told her friends and family that she was terrified for her life. She would tell Frank about the threats, and he refused to believe that his mother would say such things. But on behalf of his girlfriend, he did ask his mother, to which she denied ever threatening her. And Frank believed his ma. Elizabeth went out one day and bought herself a handgun and told Frank that if he didn't stop seeing Olga, she'd just kill herself right in front of him. He took the gun away.
You can't have this. Now go to your room. Go on now, get.
Pretty much. When threatening Olga didn't scare the young woman off,
she don't scare easy. She's Canadian.
She started her search for a hitman. She asked a car hop.
Is so unhealthy of a relationship.
It really is. She asked a car hop to throw acid in Olga's face and shove her off a cliff for $1,500.
That's a lot of money then.
It was. The car hop said, no. But they didn't go to the police. Instead, he opted to tell Frank about what his mom said. So Frank went to his mother and said, did you just offer somebody $1,500 to throw Olga or throw acid in Olga's face and shove her off a cliff? And Elizabeth was like, oh, I would never. And of course, he believed her.
He was blinded by the punani.
He just wanted to go back. It was the warmth he never knew.
Oh, gross.
It was the only warmth he never. You got the gist of what I was putting down. On another, he came out and just never wanted to go away from it.
He spent the rest of his life trying to get back from where he came from.
He sure did. So on another occasion, Elizabeth told her doctor,
Frank will never leave me. He would never get married.
And don't you know it? Frank and Olga ran off and secretly got married on June 20th, 1958, when Frank found out that Olga was pregnant with his child.
Then it wasn't the only warmth he ever knew.
When Elizabeth found out about the marriage, she forbid the new husband and wife from living together.
What?
So Frank, trying to keep his mommy happy, decided to continue to live with his mother and only visit his wife in the evenings.
What?
Yes. During one of the visits between the newlyweds, Elizabeth came banging on that door, and she had followed her son to his wife's to Olga's apartment and demanded that Frank return home at once. A fight began, and don't you know it, Claire? He done left with his mommy.
Oh my God.
Right?
Did she take him out by the ear?
No, I think she probably took him out by his penis.
Ew. Well, she said, I made it. It's mine. Give it here.
Pretty much, probably, yeah. However, a few days later, he began living with Olga. But they moved to a different apartment, and they kept the new address a secret from his mother. Elizabeth was furious. So she decided she would start harassing her new daughter-in-law while she was at work. Elizabeth told a friend named Barbara Reed in the middle of July of 1958 that she believed Olga was pregnant with another man's baby, and she was trying to frame Frank into thinking he was the true father. She also offered Barbara $1,500 to assist her in murdering Olga.
Oh my God.
Now, I don't know about you, Claire, but if my friend asked me to help her kill her pregnant daughter-in-law, that'd be a hard no for me, and I'd be calling the cops. Barbara told Elizabeth she needed to go ahead and think that one over. And after mulling it over, she decided, rather than call the Popo, she would call Frank and told Frank of what
Oh
his
my
mother was trying to
God.
do.
Everybody rats this lady out. It's so funny.
But you know what? This, again, a different person telling Frank they were offered the same sum of money to murder this girl.
He still
And you know
doesn't
what?
believe it.
Guess what Frank does?
Nothing.
He moves back in with his mother and just stays away from Olga. His
That
pregnant
upsets
wife.
it. Maybe she doesn't do the tongue trick.
It's disgusting. So he moves out of his new apartment with his wife and moves back in with his mother full time. I don't know how Olga could stand her mother-in-law being the other woman. Literally, quite literally the other woman.
I don't know why you'd want anything to do with a man that's diddling his mom.
I don't know if she knows that he was diddling her.
You said diddle.
I sure done diddly Dave.
Oh, Andrea.
Olga could not stand the way she was being treated by her mother-in-law.
It's about time.
Or the relationship between Frank and his mother, so they would fight quite frequently.
It would have been weird if they didn't argue about it.
Sure would have. In the beginning of August, Elizabeth paid an ex-convict named Ralph Winterstein, he was 25, to help her get an annulment between Frank and Olga without them knowing. So Ralph pretended to be Frank and Elizabeth pretended to be Olga. They appeared in front of a judge and they said it was an uncontested separation. And Ralph testified, pretending to be Frank, that him and Olga, who was really Elizabeth, had never lived together since they got married because Olga did not want to live with him. And the judge was like, sure, that's fine. And granted the annulment, thus
the fuck?
erasing the marriage. But fun fact, Olga, the real one, and Frank, also the real one, don't know that their marriage has been annulled.
That is so... What the hell?
Since Ralph was willing to assist with the fraudulent annulment, he was then propositioned to help get rid of Olga. When he refused that, he didn't report it because
standards.
Yes, getting a husband and wife annulled without them knowing, he's okay with that. Murdering her, not okay with. Good to know he has limits.
Yeah, I'd like to know what the pitch was. like when she's just like, hey, I got an idea. And then when somebody's like, oh, why do you want to have them, like, they'll still think they're man and wife, so you just will be snickering to the side that just wait till they file their taxes.
Well, granted, they live separately, so can they even file their taxes together?
I don't know. I live with my husband.
Same. He did not report the proposition to murder Olga because he was scared that since he was already an ex-con, that he would get in more trouble for participating in the fraudulent annulment. So he just kept his mouth shut and avoided Elizabeth for the rest of forever. Okay, so that was in the beginning of August. Now that brings us to mid-August. Elizabeth manages to figure out where Olga's new address is. And because this poor girl has moved so many times and this batshit crazy Elizabeth managed to follow her around, one day when Olga was at work, Elizabeth broke into her apartment to snoop and see if any of Frank's belongings were there. Like she wanted to see.
No, she was panty sniffing.
Yeah, see if she could smell any of her son's
Ew.
Anyway,
so okay, Andrea.
So none of this case is okay. So technically she didn't break in, but I say she broke in because she wasn't supposed to be there, knew she wasn't supposed to be there, but apparently she got the landlady to let her in the house or let her into the apartment.
That's still breaking in.
I would agree.
Even if you use a key.
Elizabeth told the manager of the apartment house.
Oh, I was like, is this home? I'm having problems today.
I noticed.
She's not gonna have him. I will kill her if it's the last thing I do.
I mean, technically, she's asked several people so far if they would kill this woman, and she's told several people, including Olga, that she intends to kill her, but nobody chooses to go to the police.
Yeah. Well,
Around this,
even if, well, no, I guess if the people who she offered money to went, they'd have something.
only if they could prove that she offered, but if it was all like a conversation.
Yeah, that what are they gonna do anyway?
Now, if every single one of these people had gone to police, I feel like,
Well, I can't. Frank knowing and not doing anything.
yeah. Around the same time of all of this shenanigans, Elizabeth meets a husband and a wife pair named Diane and Rudolph Romero. The husband was a client of Frank's. Elizabeth told the wife that Olga was blackmailing Frank and asked her to help get rid of Olga. Does that make sense? I know
Mhm.
that's a lot of people. The wife went to Olga's apartment to check the place out. And when Olga answered the door, the wife recognized her as a nurse who had cared for her several years earlier and shortly left. Elizabeth then offered the husband, who was her son's client, money to go kill Olga. He refused.
At what point does she give up? I guess not until she's dead, huh?
Yeah. During the proposition of the Romeros, Elizabeth meets another woman named Rebecca Diaz. The Romeros happened to live with Rebecca, which is how Elizabeth met them. Now, Elizabeth told Rebecca that Olga was threatening her and demanding money, and she asked if Rebecca could help her find a man to, quote, get her out of town. I guess she decided to change her tactics, and instead of asking them to kill her, if she worded it in a friendlier manner, like get her out of town, that maybe she would be able to get some assistance. And Rebecca agreed to let Elizabeth know if she would find anyone to do her dirty work. Now, so that was all in August. Now, on November 12th, 1958, Elizabeth went to Tropical Cafe with a friend named Emma Short. Keep Emma in the back of your mind because I think she should have been charged as well when Elizabeth gets put in jail, because I feel like she's just as much to blame because Emma goes with Elizabeth to meet up with Esperanza Esquivel. Esperanza owned the cafe, and her husband had been charged with receiving stolen property. And Frank was their criminal defense attorney and managed to get the case dismissed against her, and then was seeking probation for her husband, who had pled guilty. Elizabeth told Esperanza that Olga was blackmailing her and had threatened to throw acid in Frank's face. And then she asked if they would know anybody who would help protect Frank and get rid of Olga. So Esperanza said she might know some boys, but she did not know whether or not they would want to talk to Elizabeth. So the next day, Elizabeth and Emma went back to the cafe where they were introduced to Luis Moya, who's 21, and 26-year-old Augustine Baldonado. Luis was a petty thug who had quite the record, starting at 11. He
Good
was a
dog.
known drug addict. By age 12, he was arrested for frequenting houses of prostitution.
What?
Some of his
Started the syphilis treatment early, did he?
some of his past offenses included burglary, theft, possession, and smuggling of narcotics, and assaulting a person with a knife, aka stabbing someone. Also, while he was in prison, he tried to escape several times, so he was not considered a cooperative prisoner.
Imagine that.
And shocker, he also had no real work history. They say he was more or less a kept man thanks to different women.
Prostitutes?
I don't know. Maybe he did some prostitution.
Maybe. He put on some lipstick.
Well, didn't you have a case around the same time period and there was a little boy that was frequenting the red light district of San Francisco?
Yeah.
So I don't have a lot of information on his buddy, Augustine, other than he was once an army medic. Other than that, all I can tell you is Y'all are who you hang out with there, pal. So Elizabeth realized that this whole 1500 thing was not getting any bites. So she offered the two men $3,000 when the job was done, and then another $3,000 3 to 6 months after the first payment. It took me a second. That's why I was giving you a second.
That is after?
So after they kill her, they get 3,000. 3 to 6 months after the first payment of 3,000, they would get another 3,000.
But after she died.
Yes, the whole sum would be paid within 6 months of them killing her.
Okay.
That sounds like an awful deal, by the way. I always, now granted, I've never talked to a hitman, but some of the shows that I've watched, like the documentaries, it's always like an upfront payment. And then after they kill the person, they receive the rest of the payment, not go kill this person. I promise I'll pay you when you're done. Okay, so these two men have now agreed to this really crazy deal. And the four of them, Augustine, Louise, Emma, and Elizabeth, sit there and talk out several different ideas and finally decide on the two men would kidnap Olga, take her across the border and kill her in Tijuana and leave her body there. That's why I said I think Emma should have been held more accountable. Because as far as I know, she's not charged with anything.
Well, did she testify? Because that could have been what her out was.
I'm not sure if she testified.
Well, if she was cooperating in any way, that could have been her out.
Perhaps. Well, Louise said he would need money for transportation, a weapon, and gloves. Because she hired these two men, neither of which own a vehicle. So Elizabeth left for a little bit and then came back to the cafe where she paid the men $175 after pawning some of her jewelry.
Now I know why she wasn't going to pay them anything until the job was done, because I wouldn't have trusted that shit either.
Right?
I think they're going to do it.
Is what she told Emma as they were driving home. So now on November 17th, 1958, Louise and Augustine borrow a car for $25 from a friend, and the car they borrowed was a piece of garbage.
Breaks down?
Well, it gets you from a short distance of point A to point B, but was not meant to drive
road trips.
On long road trips, yes. But nonetheless, Tweedledee and Tweedledum, they borrow the car, they drive to Olga's apartment. Louise goes up to the door and Olga answers. It's in the evening, so she's in her house slippers and a bathrobe. Louise tells her that Frank was in the car, he was drunk, and he needed her help getting him out of the car. Olga followed Louise down to the vehicle. When they got to the car, Augustine was hunched over in the back seat of the car, so she couldn't see his face. It was just a man in the back of the car, hunched over. He was pretending to be passed out. As soon as she opened the back door and bent down to assist what she thought was her husband, Louise hit her on the back of the head with a pistol. Augustine pulled her into the back seat of the car. By the way, the reason she was so willing to go see her husband was that she hadn't gotten a chance to see him for 10 days since he packed up and moved back in with his mommy.
What the fuck? I think for me, it'd have been like, well, maybe go call his mom. She'll help him out.
So I literally wrote that. I would have left his ass in the back seat and said, here's his mom's address. Go there.
Yeah.
But
he
then
doesn't
again,
live here. He moved out. So
yeah. On their way out of Santa Barbara, they had to stop off at the beach because Olga was screaming and struggling. Now, mind you, at this point, she's 7 months pregnant and fighting for both her life and that of her unborn daughters. So, spoiler, she's pregnant with a little girl.
I can't believe that this man has left his wife and child.
It's disgusting. The fact that his mom has that much control over him, I find is absolutely disgusting.
Hey, you might not know this, but when did she start like the incestuous relationship with him? Was that like from childhood? And
I think so.
Just conditioned to that's what he's known.
I'm pretty sure that that's the way it is. Because here's the thing. I don't feel like a teenager or young adult is going to voluntarily start having sex with their parent because you're already at that point raised to know that that's wrong.
Yeah. Well, it's just that one other case that we've done where it was like their parents took their virginity kind of thing.
Hmm.
And they just figured that's how everybody lost their virginity.
It's super disgusting, and it's really sad for the kids. And a lot of the kids, like I was saying earlier, Gary Ridgway, the Green River killer, his
Mhm.
mom would scrub his genitals when he was a or an older young teenage-ish ages when he would wet the bed, and she would talk to him about genitalia of other men. Like,
You know what?
he
I
grew up
bet
to be a
he,
serial killer.
I bet,
So
not to get off topic onto the Green River Killer, but I'm convinced more now than ever that he didn't wet the bed. She peed on him and woke him up like, now we got to clean you.
it's
He's
disgusting.
like, I don't even remember wetting the bed, which is why you don't hear about him wetting the bed as an adult. He never had a problem.
Okay, back to Olga. She was scratching and kicking at the men,
Mhm.
and they kept beating her, and she kept fighting. This girl, I gotta give her credit. She fought her butt off, but she was outnumbered. And
Mm.
Augustine held her down while Luis struck her on the head with a 22 caliber pistol that he borrowed. So it's not even his gun, but he pistol whipped Olga so hard, he broke the gun on her skull.
The fuck? And she's still fighting?
So at that point, she was knocked unconscious. So he hops back in the driver's seat and they continue to drive while she's passed out. Augustine is in the back, tying her up with tape, and they continue out of the area. So that car that they borrowed for $25 starts having some issues and breaks down, and they realize, shoot, we're not going to make it to Mexico. So instead, they managed to get it to function just enough to drive into the mountains in Ventura County, and they dragged Olga out of the car and 7 miles off the road, down the side of a hill into a culvert that ran under the road. They tried to shoot her, but since they broke the gun, hitting her in the head, they couldn't fire the weapon.
Oh,
So these
God.
two, so these two idiots began to beat her again and again before they decided this bitch is one hell of a fighter. And Luis is quoted as telling the police later on, this bitch just would not die. I don't know why, but that
So
one just
sad.
really pissed me off. So, because beating her was not killing her, the men took turns strangling Olga.
They were tired from the beatings.
But I don't understand how you take turns strangling somebody. Like, how do you take turns with that? Like, they're choking her until she's unconscious, and then they're like, okay, my hands hurt, it's your turn, and then she's coming to, so somebody else starts strangling. I don't understand. Did they both have teeny tiny little baby hands, and so they both had to put their little grubby paws on her neck? I don't understand how you take turns strangling someone, but this poor woman is being put through hell because of her mother-in-law. Sorry. This case disgusts me. When they could no longer feel her pulse, they decided to dig a hole to bury her in. But since they were originally planning to just kill her and leave her body in Tijuana, they brought no tools. So they had to dig in the dirt with their hands, since you know how you can get through the first couple layers of dirt and then it starts getting a bit more difficult to dig.
Mm-hmm.
But with no tools, they could only get so far. They dig a very shallow grave, toss her pregnant body into it, and bury her. They then return to Santa Barbara. Luis and Augustine try to hide their bloody clothes. They take the bloody seat covers from the car, and then they tried to clean the car by sweeping it out and spraying lacquer thinner to hide the bloody spots. And then the next day, they take the car to the owner and say the seat covers had been burned by a cigarette and that they would either fix them or give her some money for the repairs. How about the lacquer thinner there, asshole? You just bleached and ruined the inside of my car. What about that? Elizabeth is then contacted by these two, and they tell her that they'd performed their part of the bargain, and she said she'd not been able to withdraw any money out of the bank because the police had been inquiring about Olga's disappearance. Uh-huh.
That trick.
Uh-huh. So I'm not sure how fast they made it back or how many
That
days it's
doesn't.
been.
These two are morons because that doesn't even make any sense. Just because they're asking about where Olga is doesn't mean you can't go to your
Uh-huh.
bank.
So Elizabeth decides to keep them happy. She cashes a check that Frank had given her to go purchase a $150 typewriter and give that money to Luis to hold him over. Now, I might not be so good at the math, but 150 out of 6,000, I would not be happy.
No. He thought he was going to finally be able to buy his own car.
Right? Emma, Elizabeth's friend, who'd been part of this whole process and planning, left an envelope for Luis at that cafe, and the envelope was addressed to Dorothy with $10 more in it.
They're going to spend their whole life. Hey, it's kind of like when you win the lottery and they ask you if you want the lump sum, or you'll get even more money if you do it paid over time.
Uh-huh.
That's the situation. Like,
they've been paid $160.
Yes, but she's going to pay that in increments for the remainder of their lives.
I would not be messing with the people that just committed murder for me.
They didn't do a very good job.
Yes.
Which is more motivation, I guess, because that was a brutal way to die.
It was so brutal.
Who brings one weapon?
People that weren't supposed to be killing anybody.
Well, they were. That's what they were hired to do. And they brought a beater of a car. The right tools, people.
Let's not give it how to commit murder. That's not the kind of podcast this is.
Saying in life, do it with intent.
Then Frank approaches his mother and questions her about the check that he had given her for the typewriter, because she didn't go buy the typewriter, but the check was cashed. And she told him that she was being blackmailed.
Hey, I've got a question. At this point, because I assume the police are not asking her about Olga's disappearance.
They sure are.
Oh, I was going to say, how long from her disappearing did it take for Frank to realize she was gone? Because it's not like he was going over there.
So what ends up happening, since you're making me jump ahead, so we'll just skip all that part when I get to it. So when Olga didn't show up to work the next day, her coworkers, since they knew that Elizabeth was crazy and constantly threatening Olga's life, when she didn't show up to work and she never missed work, her coworkers contacted police, who in turn contacted Frank. So she was known to be missing the next day.
Well, good for her coworkers.
Yeah. It'd be like if you didn't show up to work, or I don't know, when you didn't answer your phone that one day because it was raining and you was outside in the rain and didn't want your phone to get broken. I done texted your husband and said, "Is Claire okay?"
It hadn't even been an hour.
But you didn't call me at the usual time. No text, no calls, no nothing. I ain't used to that kind of silent treatment.
Like, it wasn't even an hour.
No.
Just so we're clear, if you go to the police the hour with like before an hour's, I think they're gonna think you're the crazy.
To be fair, I did text you a bunch and called you like 3 or 4 times in that 40 minutes, and you didn't answer nothing.
I like that you acknowledged that it hadn't been 40 minutes. Everyone out there, anyone talking to Andrea, if you don't respond, you can't, she will notify everyone in your life.
I notified your husband because it was out of your norm. Shut up. Next time, I won't do nothing, and then something's going to be wrong.
I'll just be there dead.
Sure will. And then he'll be laughing. Nobody, because you'll be dead.
We never returned from Walmart.
I was thinking more you got bit by a rattlesnake or run it over by a boar or whatever you got going on down there in Alabama.
Eaten by a panther.
Yeah. Anyway, so suspicious of his mother, and now she's saying she's being blackmailed. He's sad. He's worried about his wife, his pregnant wife. Frank went to police, finally, and said that he was afraid his mother was involved in Olga's disappearance and that she was being blackmailed specifically for that reason, which I got to give him credit. He definitely knew his mother, because that is 100% what happened.
Yeah, but you know what? He doesn't get that much credit because he's been told before.
Oh, of the threats, but now he's finally pieced it together and
that she might not have been telling the truth.
This whole time, she was lying to me. The nerve of that hussy. So now police are starting to investigate the disappearance of Olga because she's been reported missing, and her husband's come forward and said, "Dude, I think you need to check out my ma." So while they're investigating the disappearance of Olga, they learn about Elizabeth hiring Ralph Winterstein to pose as Frank to get that annulment.
Oh my God, yeah, I've heard about that already. There's been so much.
So much. About a month later, on December 21st, police find Olga's pregnant body in Casitas Pass of Carpintera. A few days later, police learned Augustine and Luis were hired by Elizabeth to kidnap and murder Olga. Not sure how they got to they connected those dots, but they did. And they learned that Elizabeth had offered the men $6,000 to kill her pregnant daughter in law because when they bring in Augustine and Luis, they confessed to everything and took the police directly to where they buried Olga's body. Now, this one really breaks my heart because this poor girl was brutally beaten. According to the autopsy, Olga was still alive when she was buried because they
Oh
found
my
dirt in
god.
her lungs. So she was buried alive. She was just unconscious.
They're so fucking stupid though.
They really are, especially because the one guy was an army medic. You would think he'd know how to take a pulse.
Oh my god.
How many people did he say were dead that really weren't?
It could have been such a weak, faint pulse that she didn't have a pulse at her wrist.
Yeah. Way to make it logical, Claire. I'd rather just make fun of the stupid shit.
Well, they are stupid. But that's so awful.
So awful.
She was buried alive.
How do you think her son reacted, Frank? Do you think he's
It's,
finally had
it's,
enough? Because you figure now he's learned that his mom got him annulled.
oh,
It's not
I
funny, but
don't.
it's so funny.
If somebody came up to me and was like, Dave went missing, and by the way, your mother pretended to be you and somebody else pretended to be Dave, and you guys have been divorced for a while, I'd be like, what? What?
And she done paid these two hoodlums over here to go kill
There'd
her
be
or kill him.
there'd be a lot of whats.
Mm-hmm. So how do you think Frankie Boo handled that?
I think at a certain point, since he didn't believe earlier on that people coming to him believe or that his mom was doing anything, I don't think he believes this one either. Like, no, she did not. There's got to be a misunderstanding because that's what he's going to do. His tendency to want to protect his mother is way too strong.
So you would be correct. He ends up posting his mommy's bail after getting it reduced from 50,000 to 5,000, and then they ran off together.
Oh God.
Eventually,
This is the Alabama Bonnie and Louise.
I like that. So what?
I knew that didn't sound right. It's either Thelma and Louise or Bonnie and Clyde. And I just said Bonnie and Louise, and you said it. Yeah, it sounds right. I knew it didn't sound right, and you just let me go on. I was like, it's either Bonnie and Clyde or Thelma and Louise. There's no Bonnie and Louise. That's not a thing. Just so we're clear.
Well, I knew what you meant, so my brain didn't done connect them dots.
There's something wrong with today.
So Olga's father, Elias, traveled from his home in Canada to California to identify his pregnant daughter's remains, but he was unable to bring her battered body back to Canada to have her buried because Frank was technically Olga's next of kin, which, again, that doesn't make sense to me since their marriage was annulled. But then again, because it was fraudulently annulled, does that mean that the annulment is thrown out and they're still married?
Yes, that one.
So her dad could not bring her body back to Canada. And since Frank was MIA because he ran off with his mommy, there was no next of kin to deal with her remains. Eventually, police tracked them down. And Elizabeth's trial begins on February 24th, 1959. In court, admitted to planning to kidnap her son, Frank, not her daughter-in-law. She said,
Frankie had just lost his mind over Olga, so I called my sister in Los Angeles and told her to rent an apartment for me. I was going to tie him up and take him down there to try to talk some sense into him. I didn't want to lose Frankie. I couldn't stand life alone, and I knew it. Which, by the way, if you told me you were diddling one of your children and you were going to kidnap him and this long story, I'd be like, no, I'm not renting you anything, but I'll take you on to the hospital and check you in. But this sister, where the fuck was she during all of this?
So Elizabeth claimed that Luis and Augustine were blackmailing her, and that's why she paid them money. She said she was not hiring them to kill her daughter-in-law. Instead, Elizabeth's attorney presented the theory that Olga was the victim of a ransom plot.
You know what, though? Considering these two jackasses aren't the brightest, I'm surprised she doesn't get off. Like, the jury doesn't buy her story of, no, they just couldn't follow directions. They had to borrow a car, Andrea, and their murder weapon broke. Like, I could see it be like, they weren't even supposed to grab her. They were supposed to grab him. They weren't supposed to murder anyone. It was a kidnapping.
So she could have tried that, but I'm not going to spoil this next part. We're going to get to it. But there were plenty of people to testify against Elizabeth and her stupid theories.
Yeah, she's
But
not a bright one either.
Originally, when she was claiming she was the victim of a ransom plot, said she would pay these two men $6,000 for the ransom so that she could get her pregnant daughter-in-law back.
Why didn't she tell Frank that she was kidnapped then?
Because they were going to murder her if she done told somebody. But then presented another version of events saying that Olga's murder had nothing to do with Elizabeth, but instead the payments to Luis and Augustine were made because Esperanza, remember the owner of the cafe, the woman that introduced them to these two, had threatened her because she was unsatisfied with Frank's legal advice to her husband. So I feel like the fact that she provided different excuses on how everything transpired, it was enough to make the jury go, this doesn't sound like it's not possible to have more than one truth here. But it took the jury 4 hours and 51 minutes to deliberate. And in that time, they decided on March 16th, 1959, that she was guilty of murder. And so were both of the hitmen. 4 days later, the trio was sentenced to death by gas chamber.
Did they die?
On August 8th, 1962, all three were executed in the gas chamber at San Quentin State Prison. During her execution, Elizabeth walked in the chamber, looked around, and saw that her son was not there. Right up until the second they executed Elizabeth, Frank fought to save his mama's life. He was in a federal court trying to win a last-minute reprieve to save his mommy. Elizabeth's last words were recorded as,
"Where's Frankie?"
Elizabeth Duncan is the last woman to have been executed in California. And, in case you're curious, Frank Duncan decided that while his mommy was in prison, he could no longer have her taco.
Ew.
So he went ahead and remarried. And then his new wife was also an attorney, but they ended up getting divorced a few years later. And then he moved away and was never again in their headlines.
That's because apparently his mom did something special.
Well, he's a serial marrier, just like his mother.
Yeah, I was going to say, apparently they didn't do the serial divorcing.
They sure done didn't.
They just collected them like coins.
Sure did. But that is the story of Elizabeth Ann Duncan and her love for her son.
Brings a whole new meaning to a golden child.
Brings the whole new meaning to a mama's boy.
Ew. Or a titty baby.
Or a monster-in-law.
Yeah. So be grateful out there that your in-laws aren't incestuous.
Or hiring hitmen.
Well, they have that too. More importantly. Well, I feel like both are important.
I was going to say, I don't know. I feel like they're both equally important.
I'd wish for neither. Thank you for listening to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Claire.
I'm Andy.
Follow us each week to get your fix of the atrocities that occur in true crime. And don't forget to tell people about us and rate us if you like us. But don't rate us if you didn't. Just change the